Spring 1791 follows S2E34, 5th of March 1791, St. Piran's Day, Gemina's 18th birthday. The wood of the handle was gnarled and shaped, molded by the many hands that had held it before her. Jemima Withering followed the line of lanterns, placed in a line following the underground passage, angles and facets made large by the shadows. She knew those lanterns, knew those men. For had not this been a similar scene, nearly a year before, but in a different mine? Picks and shovels shouted at the rock to yield, lugubrious cheers echoed through the tunnel as lumps fell like dying men on a battlefield. Jemima followed Chigo Martin and Ted Carkeek onwards, to the north of Wilgrace. She had seen the day in by spending the night with Dick Trevithick. 3 months earlier, January 1791, the morning after the shock of Edward Bull's letter, Jemima had gone to Dick at Dolcoath. By mid-morning she held tools in her hands as they installed a Cornish engine for Walgan and Wheel Plenty. Billy Wolfe's below. Arthur proposed him last time we were at Mr. Harvey's, he told her, stepping out from the wide depression in the earth that was the Dolcoath mine entrance. Dick ruffled his hair and strode up the ladder. Jemima looked down into the steam-filled cavern to the figure in control of the engine. High-pressure steam was dangerous, as Watt and Bolton were touting. But only if it were left. And they never were. There was always a driver, and so Arthur Wolfe's little brother was Dolcoath's. Not here, Jemima told him, as he made to kiss her. So they walked around to the secluded spot where Jemima had bathed and Dick had guarded her before he took her hand, and then held her head as he embraced her. They walked hand in hand down through the rocks to the back, onto the strand where, just over a week earlier, Jemima had given Dick and Humphrey each a necktie, and she noticed Dick was wearing his now, and talked. She told him of Edward's letter, and that she would come with him if he decided to go to Shropshire. Truly? Dick asked, his eyes lighting up. Yes, Jemima told him, in that moment believing her own words most assuredly as she did in the air around them, the sand, the sea. I know the area, I know the people. You would be away from legal action from Mr. Watt. What? Trevithick scoffed. But Jemima stopped walking and took both his hands in hers, her black, curling hair whipping from her ribbons and around her face. Even Gregory says he is serious, his own son. Jemima pressed the urgency, and Dick pressed his lips onto hers, urgently, hungrily. Jemima knew that she did love him, and she knew that she was loath to lose him to Salop. They walked back, and Dick slowly revealed his secret to her, that, since the wakes, he had been covertly sending steam engine plans and parts to somewhere that Edward had told him would be kept from James Watt, John Harvey of Hale, making and storing them under the watchful care of Henry, his son. In fact, Mr. Harvey wishes me to come over to Hale this very day to fit with Arthur Wolfe a new device he has made. You will come, will you not? And Jemima did go, to the scarred landscape that was a hybrid of rock and vegetation and steel and steam. To Henry Hale, Dick's comrade in the steam war, who had defended Dick so vociferously to James Watt at the wakes and had sworn he would do anything he could to help Dick triumph over Watt's legal threats. Henry took Dick over to the specialized pump that Wolfe was working on, which needed to be narrower and still build up high pressure to remove the encroaching ocean. Have you been to Shropshire, then? Came the tinkling voice of Henry's sister, Jane, who was giving Jemima the headache of delaying her traverse to be beside Dick to see the engine. She smiled as nicely as she could. I lived there as a child, Jemima replied, vaguely. I know the country. Oh, sighed Jane, I would that he would not go so far. I would not like to go so far from the sea. We have water, Jemima told her. Controlled, tamed water, to do with as we please. My father knows the Duke of Bridgewater, and James Brindley. I'll have canals as well as coal mines when I am old enough. Jane stopped for a moment, and gave Jemima a look up and down. I suppose, she retorted, that is the fashion there, women owning men's business. Far better than no business at all but hauling 100 weight of coal through mine shafts and then breaking them to pieces, like the Balmaidens do. Far better to be in control of a business than those poor souls. You'd not have women in your mines then? Nor children? I'd have anyone who wishes to earn a living, Jemima replied, recalling Jane Harvey's words of a few minutes before. Something about the way she said, "I would that he would not go so far." "Now, if you'll excuse me, your brother and my business partner wish to show me Mr. Wolf's engine." And without waiting for Miss Harvey to reply, she strode off to the pumping engine house, Dick nodding to her as she approached. When Dick had walked Jemima back to Cambourne that evening, they stopped at the crossroads to pool. "Mother is with the Days this evening. I'm to walk with my sisters." "Oh, Jemima, that you would come to Shropshire." They shared a kiss that had made Jemima's skin prickle and heart beat faster, and that she never wanted to end, and Dick had walked her back to Meadowsweet. Did he doubt her? Dick Trevithick was known for his lack of loquaciousness, but he wanted her with him. And frankly, Jemima would be beside him as he built his locomotive engine with Derby's iron and steel. Could anything be more marvelous than being in the country she knew, with an engine to build beside the man she loved? And she did love him. When Jemima saw him, her heart raced a little faster. Her legs moved more swiftly to be beside him. It was as if nothing else mattered in the world than to be beside Dick Trevithick. But did she love him enough? Did she love him enough to tell him everything from the content of the letters from Gregory and from Edward? Did she love him enough to risk his flight to Shropshire and away from her, knowing that a patent infringement summons was already on the way? And did she love him enough to leave behind her obsessive thoughts of the large seam of copper covering several miles, 40 fathoms below the Cornish hillside? He was not gone yet, Jemima decided, as Humphrey and her father hailed hearty greetings of goodbye the next morning, and so the question of the copperload was academic. And it was with such thoughts in her head as she walked to Wheal Leisure about a fortnight later, and passed Jago Martin and Ted Carkeek. Both young men stopped, and Jemima did too, remembering well that they had been beside her below with the Southern copper load, rather than Jimmy and Bobby. "Good to see you again, Miss Withering," Jago Martin told her, taking off his hat. Beside him, Ted took off his and fiddled with it in his hands. "And you are mining again," Ted observed. "Pity not at Grace," Jago added, smiling at Jemima. "With Poldark?" Jemima shook her head. "I don't think so." Both young men shuffled their feet. It was Jago who dared to speak, and he took a bold step towards Jemima. "If he did abuse yesterday, I am sure it was for the good of the mine." "Really?" Jemima asked, doubtfully. And she recalled that night, of his temper, of his chasing after her, and restraining her, all the while repeating what she now knew to be the truth, again and again, that she was obsessed with Wheal Leisure and sought to humiliate him with George Walgan. "And I am obsessed with it, angry, Jago. Everyone could have been richer today had Poldark listened to me." "Well, Walgan listened, and Betty's is bringing up copper, red and green, by the bucketload." She looked between the two young men, who both were staring at her strangely. "What?" she asked. It was Ted who told her how they'd found the Gossens, all indicating copper, by the blue-green bloom on iron and tin. Gingerly, Ted removed one from his pocket and handed it to Jemima. "Yes," she said, simply, looking over the surface. "Just like we found at the 40th across the water at Leisure." "Happen we did," Jago agreed. "At the 40th, another we found in an adit that goes down to the shoreline." "It was exactly between Grace and Leisure," Jemima interrupted. "That it was," Jago admitted, although by the look on his face it seemed to Jemima as if the admission had compromised his loyalty. And that had been the start. How it was that night, after her father and Humphrey had gone to bed, and every Friday night until Dick had left, Jemima became Jimmy West, to work beside her old colleagues and contribute with zeal to find the copper that she knew was there. But first, there was a discrepancy to recompense, and she bid Jago and Ted goodbye. As she had been doing from the first Friday since she began back at Wheal Leisure, Jemima had been adding just a little to each man's wages, to make up for the half-day they had lost, from the money pushed into her hand on a Saturday morning. "I feel I should have done more to stop Poldark taking the things. The men are not to blame," she told herself, as Jimmy West arrived for his night shift. And soon in the shelter of the wind, at the 40th with Jago Martin to her left and Ted Carkeek to her right, the picks and tools once of Leisure were now at her hand. 88,888,888, and labored, and came up exhausted, and had repeated the nighttime mining a week later. Winter was suspiciously mild, which told of cold and snow later on. That week, she had borrowed Humphrey's compass and had determined, exactly north from Grace, south from Wheel Leisure, and noted this in her record book, in a code known only to herself, at the back of their progress. And so the weeks went on, weekdays at leisure, Fridays with Dick and Friday nights under the earth at Wheel Grace on avaricious pursuit of the beginning of copper, Jago indicating east, where tin had been discovered, and establishment between them all that in the east lay Wheel Plenty, another Walgan mine that brought up tin. That tin had been found was no surprise if stratification was applied. Good evening, Ted told her, on the day of Candlemas, for the miners had come from St. Perrin's Church from lighting of candles, the true end of Christmas. That night, candles continued the marking of the festival down at the 20th fathom level as they trod north and made the most progress they had made in the whole month before. As they ascended, Jemima's eye caught the pump, emmantled in its brick housing. They had built it, Edward, Dick and she, and Jemima had repaired it on Christmas Day. However much they could mine before, the pump only increased their rate. "What's yonder?" Jemima asked Jago, pointing southeast. "Wheel Plenty, Walgan Mine," he told her, as he knocked his boots against the ground. And even though Jemima knew the answer, she asked, "What do they bring up in?" "Then Poldark will find tin," she told them. Ted turned his head to Jago and gave his friend a questioning look, but Jago said nothing. Jemina's mind, however, was filled with ideas of rock layers in the earth, of piles of rock on top of rock, the Plutonian theory of formation, which Davis Skiddy had proposed to be the formation of the Earth's minerals. Jemima wondered how she could have not seen the link before, her tired mind going over the idea again in order to remember it for her next letter. Jemima bid Jago and Ted a good morning before turning to go, glancing at the pit pony who was turning the mechanism that lifted the buckets of ore, before being called back by name. "Jimmy West." Jemima's heart sank. She knew that voice, and she turned slowly and obediently to William Henshaw. He did not speak at first, just looked at her, from her cap, down her clothes, finishing at her boots. Nothing out of place, as Jemima had made sure there wouldn't be. "William West, from Poole. My brother works for John Harvey." Jemima made sure she looked deferential, slurred her words a little, imitated the accent. "Very good." William Henshaw nodded, and held his hand out towards the east. Poole was halfway between Camborne and Redruth, and Jemima strode away, shoulders burning from being bent over to mine beside Ted and Jago until she got home, and to a blessed strip wash in the scullery and bed for a few hours. 88,888,888. Saturday had given way to a Sunday in which Jemima's father felt weak again, though not weak enough for chapel, and the next day, Walgan came to Wheel Leisure, and was delighted with the copper that had made it to Grassside. He took Jemima aside and spoke to her about the stratification theory again, his plum-coloured coat contrasting to good effect with the grey of the sea, his appearance just so, of a gentleman. "If only there was a way of verifying your proposal," George Walgan told her. "Can you think of one?" "Only to sink sample pits every so often between here at Wheel Grace," Jemima told him, concentrating on making sure she did not tell of her insider knowledge of the other end of the seam, though only nebulous promises. Copper was there, where she had hypothesized. She sat beside Jimmy and Bobby on the tufty grass outside Wheel Leisure with her piece of meat and onions. Walgan had departed as quickly as he had arrived, and Jemima sat beside in the unusually warm and sunny midday with Jimmy and Bobby, pleased at the conversation she had overheard, and began to tell them what George Walgan said. "We know he be pleased," Bobby told her, munching on a piece of grey bread. "All have we been extra in our wages." And Jemima was pleased the boy thought it, rather than anyone knowing she had added it. Her shadow looked past Jemima as she was about to get back up to her feet. One of the miners, whose pitch was on the 10th, was standing over her, a younger man, a similar age to Jim. Jemima got to her feet. Jim and Bobby beside her. "Where you be at?" he asked her. John Tregadillet, an old miner from Poole, who she recognized from the Redruth Chapel. "Cornwall," Jemima replied. "For Cornwall, the Midlands." "But Cornwall now?" "The North." The man nodded. "North?" She shook her head. "There was more land, more places, north of Shropshire. Everything beyond the Tamar is north, everything beyond Street Hostel be north." And it was true, to everyone in Cornwall, including Dick Trevithick. Which was why, when she went the next day to Golcoth, he was staring strangely at the letter that had come, or so it must have seemed to Dick, from the north, a place a Cornishman believed to be so far away from Cornwall as to being unthinkable. And something more, the engine was not working. Dick said nothing to her as he stalked the edge of the pit head, but handed her, not the letter from Edward Bull, which Jemima would read later, but an order from a Reverend Dr. Anthony Halse, of Bodmin, concerning the stopping the working of the steam engine a Broken Bar of Mr. Richard Trevithick, and that should he so note a broken bar, that all of the Tong Tong mines would be ordered stilled. "Sir Francis has a copy, of course," Dick told Jemima morosely. "And it names me alone, to have." Dick took the letter from Jemima's unresisting hand, and stared at it again. Committed deliberate patent infringement. So the machine was silent and Dick went off to work beside his father. Jemima went too, but Captain Trevithick, as she expected, wished her well but had nothing she could do. So she returned to leisure, knowing that in a few hours she would repeat her Friday night at Wheel Grace. But Jemima was shocked to find George Walgan waiting for her. "I expected to see you, after the news." And he took her to the office and explained that all mine owners had been sent an order by Halse. Then, he told her the shocking news. "Miss Withering, Master Trevithick has been arrested. Breach of patent." What was not happy with a mere warning, and has used his influence in but, "I only just left Golcoth," Jemima interjected. "Come," Walgan told her, "walk beside me." And they took the path between Plenty and towards Grace, the sun on the grass, on her face, mocking her despair as he explained, "A Parliament via Broken Bar." "Well," Walgan paused, "amongst people he knows." Jemima stopped, and then turned to George Walgan. "Not me?" she asked. "I am as culpable, Mr. Walgan," she told him, because a realization had come to her. While Jemima was grateful not to be arrested, it meant she wasn't equal to him, to Bull. Her contribution meant nothing. "Your father knows Mr. What?" Walgan pressed. And there it was, Jemima thought, afterwards. It was to check whether her influence wasn't going to close his mine. She was to learn this later, as their friendship progressed. George Walgan only ever looked after George Walgan. But, if you were neither exploitable nor an obstacle, he could use his influence for good. This time, he chose good for Jemima. "No need to worry," he told Jemima, when she confirmed that her father had long known what. "Our engine is unique and was built quite independently of anything that was ever developed at the Ding Tongs. My lawyers will attest to that." 88,888,888. And a letter arrived from Edward Bull a few days later. The housekeeper had pushed it under her door one late morning after one of her shifts at Grace. Jemima opened it in haste and held it towards the mid-morning sunlight, warm on her face through the glass. "Your name is out of it, Jemima, and the mine at Madley can be yours. I made a promise on your behalf to Lord Derby." "It's yours," he reiterated, "and glad you have a place to go." 8,888,888. Mid-February and Humphrey was back from Penzance. He had visited his sisters first and had come back via Tehiddy. Bassett had asked for Dr. Withering to call, but, before Jemima could reply to inform him that her father was too unwell to leave the house, Humphrey had arrived, left to pay the call and returned that afternoon. "You look unwell, Jemima," he told her. "Are you sickening for an illness?" There is a fever going round the Redruth area, which made Jemima worry that, with her nocturnal work as Jimmy West, she may well have contracted something. "If anything, it's a brain fever," She told Humphrey, worry for Dick, concern for mining. She took him into her father's study where, on the desk, lay the gossans, the samples taken along the line where she had predicted for want of a better phrase, a seam of copper. Humphrey took them in his hands, as the proto-spring daylight played along their facets. These are rare, and expensive, he told her. Davis would like to see these. You've seen him? Jemima asked, her weariness ebbing somewhat at the thought of her friend, and happier, more carefree times. He knows about Dick's situation, and believe me, Humphrey told her, he is doing what he can, legally. Which isn't a lot considering a judge is involved. Jemima put her hand over Humphrey's, but could think of no words to say. He smiled to Jemima and then turned her hand over, placing into it the rock samples. You're trying to prove your theory, he told her. There was no denying it. It's why you're. Humphrey nodded towards the ceiling, where John Withering was abed. I'll see your father, he told her. And say these. He folded his hand over Jemima's, holding the rock ore. Then you'll tell me, Jemima, how grown up he was. Jemima thought, in that moment, grown up, and still the little boy quizzing her and Davis at his garden gate. Humphrey, she told him, feeling a weight fall from her shoulders. I will tell you. 88,888,888. The night was cold, but clear. The moon was lighting the path from Meadowsweet Cottage. A full moon. Holding up the tradition, Jemima thought, along with her, other miners were coming. It mattered not that it was dark, Grace was dark underground day or night. Jimmy, nodded Jago Martin, as they neared the bend. The engine house was silhouetted against the bright February moonscape. Anoa e got with the, oh be this? Echoed Ted Carkeek. Be cousin mine, Jemima replied as Jimmy. Captain Poldark Bisani may start, but he must work on the night. She watched Ted glance across to Humphrey, for that's who was standing beside Jemima, and then back to Jago. Did he father know of this? Ted asked Jago. 8 was afore Christmas, Jemima told them. He a good worker, come from Dolcoath, like me. And they have no engine now. That got their attention. Little gossip stemmed from mines. By their very nature mines were straightforward affairs. But Dick Trevithick's arrest had roused the county, by its suddenness and manner. Jemima felt a lurch in her stomach at invoking Dick's name, but she needed Jago to forget about asking Zachy Martin, or their cover would be truly blown. Such was the man's integrity. Ours be not working, Ted told Jemima. But it was working as the dawn rose, the sun cold and yellow, replacing the moon over the sea. Tumafrey lit a fire, out of view of the mine. Why didn't you tell me you had a place at the Royal Institution? Jemima asked, placing a driftwood stick on the fire. Humphrey stopped in the process of adding more wood. He had found time the day before to fish from the head at Street Agnes and had stored it in a basket. Now, the pollock was being backed, covered as it had been by Humphrey with sand. Why didn't you tell me about Dick? I would have thought Davis told you, Jemima told Humphrey. He told me about your news. I didn't keep anything from you, Humphrey told her, which made Jemima's heart beat in her chest. She had told no one of her affectionate actions towards Dick, though no one had ever asked her. Dick plans to move to Coal Brookdale, and work with Edward Bull. Lord Dudley will keep watch from their door, as long as he works on the engine for his mines. A movable one. It didn't help. Mollifying the truth only made Jemima feel more guilty. And I said I'd go with him. The fish smoked in its sandy casing. It was in need of turning. But Humphrey just stared at her. Back to your home? Your old home? With Dick? Yes, maybe. Jemima looked away. I cannot leave father. Nor your audacious work tonight. You made their engine work when there has been a cease and desist order on all pumping engines west of Launceston. Well, that'd be all of them, Jemima protested. And I know Trevorgy and Day are using theirs. No mine can be without their engines. That judge will have a queue of mine owners and shareholders at his door, if they haven't been already. The sun rose higher and Humphrey knelt before the makeshift cooking oven, pushing the fish to one side, before using a stick to peel open the casing. It smelt good, really good. He sat beside Jemima and pushed it towards her, steam rising from the body. as he took the other one and did the same for himself. "Do you have enough samples to take with you to London? I dare say more can be sent, if I were to ask someone I know." He pinched some of the fish meat and brought it to his lips, breathing out quickly to cool it in his mouth, Jemima passing him her water skin. "If you are not in that terrible black country, that is 88,888,888. We can sell it," Dick told her, when she went across to Dolcoath, 3 days after hers and Humphrey's mining adventure and 2 days after he had left for London. No time to mourn the loss of her friend. A letter had come from Captain Trevithick asking Jemima to come in haste from Wheal Leisure. Tom Harry, whose permission she did not need in the first place, simply nodded as she waved the letter towards him, and was over at Lord Bassett's estate in an hour, after borrowing a horse from Raydruthin's stableyard. "Good health to your father, Miss Withering," called the landlord, for whom Dr. Withering had been treating his wife. By all accounts her father had sent no bill last time, and she agreed to stable the horse at the Bassetts for it to be collected by the landlord's brother. "You wished to see me, Captain?" Jemima called at Dolcoath's mine office. But it wasn't Captain Trevithick who answered but Dick. It was as much as Jemima could do not to jump into his arms. Instead, they took a walk around all the mines at Ting-Tong and Dick told her what had happened. "Lord Bassett petitioned the Reverend Else, and paid a fine for my release." It was short, and to the point. So Jemima read to him Bull's letter. "Dick can come when he likes. You can come home. Derby presses for you both. Leave working at Dolcoath, then he and I can go into business." Their walk then took them, beside the Trevithick family cottage, Mrs. Trevithick, Dick's mother, watching them walk along the path towards the cliffs. When they were further along, out of the view of the cottage, Jemima took his hand, then leaned up to kiss him. "You will come?" Dick asked, handing Jemima back the letter. "If I go, to get out of this, it is only a temporary fix. What is setting a date to take me to court? Lord Bassett has vouchsafed my confinement to my home and to the mines." Jemima took his hand, her heart beating fast in her chest. "I would like to," Jemima admitted, guiltily. "I will see how my father is." "I will wait," Dick told her. "I will wait until I can wait no longer." And perhaps Jemima knew then, at that moment, she was determined more than ever to go with him to Coal Brookdale. But instead, she threw herself into his arms, and kissed him as if there was no one else in the world. 88,888,888. And perhaps things would have been different had Jemima's father not been on his feet the next day, as if the last fortnight suffering from fatigue and pains had been nothing at all. Or, perhaps not. Sometimes these things just happen. "Father," Jemima exclaimed. "Should you be up? Humphrey has done wonders," her father told Jemima, kissing her forehead. "As have you, or so he tells me." "I believe I am proving stratification, father," Jemima replied, feeling her friend in her heart, Humphrey Davy, who knew she would never tell John Withering her progress, and felt compelled to do so on her behalf. "Come, daughter, you must not be modest. And besides, I have another letter here." He slid a bright, neat rectangle of paper towards her. "He tells me your work is exceeding his expectations and leisure is producing large parcels of tin." Dr. Withering waited for Jemima to fill in the extra details for him. "As is Gracie a broken bar, I have a broken bar with a few nefarious methods, been able to sample along the tin line." She smiled to her father. "Which I think you already know from Humphrey." She nodded to her father's other letter. "He essayed them for me. I've already informed George Walgan. And he is being patient as a man can be as a mine owner unable to use his pumping engine." John Withering smiled again, and passed her the second letter. He watched as she popped open the seal of a resplendent W, the insignia of a man uncomfortable in gentle society. "He requests my presence at Cardew. He will send a carriage for noon." "Indeed," chuckled Dr. Withering, "he really must want his mining engineer." "Don't worry about me, my darling girl," John Withering told her as SBE took his shoulder to guide him back to bed. "A fever and a long recovery time. I will be well presently, I do assure you." "Go, now, quickly," he pressed, waving a hand. Be sure to come back with news from the rock face.